Welcome back to the Invest in Yourself podcast. Today's guest is former shot caller for the Aryan Brotherhood. His name is Michael Thompson. When Michael was 22, Michael was sentenced to 7 years to life. He ended up doing 45 years in prison. During Michael's time in prison, he would join the Aryan Brotherhood. Michael would grow in the ranks of the Aryan Brotherhood. He would eventually go on to be an informant against the Aryan Brotherhood. Michael had many attempts on his life during his time in prison, but he managed to get out of prison alive. Please subscribe for more interviews like this, and without further ado, let's get into Michael's story. How you doing today, Michael?
I don't know that I could be any better, Adrian. How about you?
Oh, I'm pretty damn good, man, besides having car issues today, but we're here making this happen, and I've been really looking forward to this interview with you. I mean, we've been trying to get it all year, but now we're finally making it happen.
We are, and I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, well, you have a really good redemption story, so I mean, that's, the whole theme of my podcast, that I want to get out of everyone's story that comes on. But I mean, to have that redemption story, you had went through some stuff in your past, and I mean, getting involved with criminal life, going to prison and coming out and changing, but kind of give a background of a little bit of your early life and upbringing.
Well, it's really about mastering adversity, Adrian. I, grew up first 12 years of my life on and off the reservation, but spent a lot of time on the reservation, abject poverty, and endured a lot there just as a result of my fair features. My elder used to tell me that bigotry wears many feathers, and it does.
Yeah.
So I had to contend with that, but the blessing in my life was being taken in by my elder, he who walks on top of the wind. He owned an Arabian horse ranch in Cleveland National Forest and ran a herd of Black Angus cattle. So it was really a boy's dream come true. And so in addition to working with horses and working with cattle, it was ranch life in general. I grew up with the Western ethos, and, I didn't learn my ways on the reservation. You would think that would be the obvious thing. But when you live in abject poverty like that and alcoholism prevails, there's not a lot of spirituality. The connection isn't there. So the blessing was going to live with my elder and, what he taught me.
Yeah, and I mean, for you to end up here, how did you end up in this area?
Well, you mean on the reservation?
Yeah, because I mean, you weren't born there, were you?
No, I wasn't. I was born in Tehachapi, and that's Kauai Sioux Nuoa area, and I'm familiar with it, and I have relatives in that area. I have a auntie. When you go across the mountain, the High Sierras there, I have an auntie that was on the Hupa. Actually, she was Yurok, and you have Yurok, which is downriver, and then you have Karuk, which is upriver. And so I had that association. I had family in Klamath Falls, but I had relatives who lived on the Big Pine Reservation. And, it's like, I think I said it's Paiute Shoshone. And so you had a lot of trade amongst the Paiute Shoshone. They'd go across the mountain, Miwok, Maidu, and other nations.
Yeah, I mean, so growing up where you grew up, I mean, it was just really poor and stuff, but I mean, it was all being around nature and, really getting the exposure of being around that instead of so much as the city life. Did you go to school much while growing up, or was you mainly on the reservation, or how did that work?
On the reservation, no. It what you essentially had to do, they had what they called the Little Red School, and it was a red brick house, one room, grades 1 through 12, all in one room. And essentially what you did was you showed up for roll call and then you left. And, so I grew up illiterate. Now, when I went to high school, that's when I was with my elder. That was at Villa Park. And that's in the foothills of Southern California. And still couldn't read or write, but I was good in sports. So with the A that I received in sports and the A that I received in woodshop, I got D's and everything else, and it passed me. But I graduated high school being illiterate.
Wow. Well, I mean, to be now, I mean, you really sound professional. You carry yourself well. So, I mean, you can learn a lot over time. So, I mean, it really just goes to show. I mean, people can really. It don't matter. I mean, whether you went through that, you can still come out and, on top and learn. You still be formal and educational, man. Because you're very well spoken now. So I
Thank
could
you.
never even think about that as that you were ever illiterate. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah, it just goes to show you. I mean, that goes to the heart of really mastering adversity. And, you have to come to that adversity of your own volition, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And so that, the desire, if you will, to want to learn. And I
Mhm.
had that. But, I should also note that I had a lot of help from, a lot of people in the pursuit of my education. And had I not had that help, I don't think I would have been as successful. So, it goes to that idea of, no man is an island unto himself. It takes a community, it takes a village.
That's true.
And I had that available to me, and I'm very grateful for that.
Yeah, and when you started high school, I mean, even I guess maybe even before that, when did like the trouble kind of start for you? Did you always have a rocky trouble childhood, or was that never even a thing until you got to be an adult?
No, I had a wonderful childhood as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I endured some beatings, some pretty severe beatings on the reservation, but I understood those,
Hmm.
for what they were. When you look at the Native community and the oppression that they suffered, and the race memory that they have as it relates to their own oppression, and then in later years, I certainly understood, why they saw me as a threat to their survival. These fair features of mine exemplified something within their own race memory. So I've never really held that against them. It did afford me the opportunity to understand racism on one particular level. We oftentimes think of racism as only being associated with certain minorities, and that's not necessarily true. As my elder said, bigotry wears many feathers. So no, in growing up with my elder particularly, I mean, I rode the rodeo circuit, I showed horses in the arena, I hunted, I fished. I grew up with what I call the Western ethos, and it was actually wonderful. So no, my troubles didn't start until um, I essentially aligned myself with the wrong group,
Hmm.
and that was through circumstance. The woman I was married to at the time had a cousin who had paroled from Soledad, and he hooked up with a couple of drug dealers, and those two were out on bail, federal charges. And now you want to remember, I'm naive to this particular community.
Hmm.
I was working, and I did some work for this one guy that had a Mexican food supply outlet. And so, that was my only association. But point is that these two guys that were out on bail intended to abscond. So they were looking for resources by which to do that. And they knew that this one individual had large sums of money that he kept in his house. And he was the leader of a drug cartel. So their idea was to kidnap his children and with the ransom money abscond to Canada. And my wife's cousin, who worked for them, didn't want to get involved, unfortunately, but I did. So I obtained the phone number of the individual, gave him a call, and told him what was going to happen. Ultimately, it did happen, and the two individuals were killed with their own weapons in their effort to kidnap this individual's children.
I
Go
was
ahead.
gonna, yeah, no, I was just gonna say. So, I mean, you weren't even involved with none of this stuff. I mean, it just so happened the situation came across you. This guy was, a drug dealer, drug leader, cartel member, and then, I mean, these guys were gonna threaten him, is what I'm understanding. So, I mean, you were just kind of like a bystander, and there was other people around you that didn't want to do anything, but you really wanted to step in and save his
Yeah, his daughters. That's essentially what
daughters.
happened. The problem with that is that when it all came down and the bodies were discovered, Unfortunately, it's one of those situations where individuals want to shift the responsibility of that. And I assume responsibility for my part in it. That was calling the individual and letting him know, what was going to happen. But that was the extent of it. Now, I took that a step further, and one of the victims, the wife of one of the victims, unfortunately was perceived as a potential threat for a number of reasons. And so I took her up to Oregon for her own safety, along with her children. And, that made me look bad. In other words, they made the allegation, that I killed this man to steal away his wife. That was anything but true. But that just goes to show you the drama that can be developed in the course of the prosecution of individuals who are attempting to keep themselves from going to prison.
Yeah.
So, and the prosecutor wasn't of any help to me in that regard either. Bottom line is that I was convicted, and interestingly enough, I was the only one that was convicted of all charges.
Not even the cartel dude that pulled the trigger?
No, he ended up doing 4 years.
Wow.
I suppose the opportunity bias in that is that at least he had the opportunity to raise his children, and so I'm grateful for that.
Well, I mean, that is something for you to even, say that you're grateful for that, or be humble in some kind of way. Because for you, I mean, you lost many years of your life, and I mean, that wasn't even your intention at all to get anyone killed or anything like that. But that's what happened. Why not go to the police and tell them? Why tell this guy?
A lot of people have asked me that question, but that goes hand in hand with your environment, the way you grow up. Mm-hmm. So I had no association with law enforcement at all. On the reservation, they had a sheriff that came by, maybe once a month. Living with my elder on his ranch up in the Cleveland National Forest, same thing. And so I grew up with the idea that if there was an issue to be addressed or dealt with, you did it yourself, as opposed to calling law enforcement. And you want to remember, this is back in the 60s, early 70s. So
before phones and everything were accessible everywhere. I mean, we have them in our pockets now everywhere we go, but
it may be hard to imagine, but we had one phone, for instance, on the ranch. It was a rotary type dial phone. And we were so isolated that you had what they called back then party lines, so that if you picked up the phone to use it, there may be somebody else down the valley on the phone, and you'd have to say, Mabel, get off the phone, I need to make a call. So
I mean, it was a different time, and you just weren't really, and law enforcement wasn't a major present there. So I mean, with that guy that had gotten 4 years, I mean, how did they? What was the law enforcement's? Why did they give you so much time and give this guy only 4 years?
Well, I think that the jury didn't believe that he was involved in a conspiracy. And, that may be true. I can't say. I've maintained my innocence on this for 50 years. And, I finally got it back in court based on a new law here in California as it relates to the felony murder rule. I was convicted based on the natural and probable consequences associated with aiding and abetting. And, that was the charge that really came my way, was aiding and abetting. So with the change in the legislature, it gave me an opportunity to go back into court and attempt to have these charges dismissed. And I'm in that process right now. Yeah. It's back and forth. I mean, people oftentimes don't understand the legal ramifications of pursuing anything. Really, it's arduous, and it takes sometimes years. But
with you, I mean, maintaining your innocence for this long and wanting to still go back in court now that you're out of prison, I mean, how does it? What do you want from that now that you're free? Just to clear your name and let people know.
Sure, I want exoneration. Mm-hmm. I've already done the time, so you can't get that back.
No.
So it's not a question of that. It's a question of essentially, in my mind, righting a wrong.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. No matter how old you become, I'm in my 70s now, and I've still got decades ahead of me. And so I'd like to have that cleared.
Yeah, just for even peace of mind, you know what I mean? Just
Yes.
and for the public, they would see it all and everything as well. But I mean, for you, you went in there for so long. I mean, and so it's more of a, I would think, more of a peace of mind for you more than anything, wouldn't it?
Well, I don't lose sight of the victims in this. There were children involved, and they grew up, without their fathers. And, that's important. That's significant. And to me, it's important that they know the truth, as it relates to how their fathers died, why they died, and by whom. And I think that's important. When we talk about victims, I'm a huge believer in that. That these children who are now adults, in their 50s,
Hmm.
that they deserve to know the truth. And so, that's part of my motivation here. And then, of course, I don't think you can clear your name. I think, once you're tagged with being a murderer,
Yeah.
a felon, and, in my case, that's exacerbated by the fact that when I went to prison, I became a member of a gang and eventually one of its leaders. So, that's my history, and there's no way to sidestep that. So
No.
I don't believe that I should. You approach it head on, and you address it. You tell your truth, and you leave it at that. And hopefully that has value to the victims and anyone else that's has an interest.
Yeah, I can definitely see the reasoning behind that and wanting to really help them out with telling them the story, whether they want to believe it or not. I mean, it's out there. This is the proof. This is what
Mhm.
what happened once
Mhm.
the court is settled and everything's done. But like you said, that's years and years of process. But for you, it's an important thing. And I remember talking to you, hell at the beginning of this year, and you told me that you were in court for I believe probably this, but I
Yeah.
mean, there's a lot of tough long days with these.
Well, I've got a lot of litigation going on right now. There's the California District Attorneys Association objects to the fact that Governor Newsom released me. I was released under the Youthful Offender and Elder Offender Acts. And the District Attorneys Association objects to that. They don't want to see individuals given consideration for youthful offenses and the lack of um, emotional intelligence on the part of those individuals. So some consideration is given, and I think it should be given for the lack of that brain development and how that applies to the crime that was committed. It's a case by case basis, and it should be. But it has great value towards assisting those individuals who are interested in redemption and redeeming themselves as it relates to their crimes and evolving in their humanity and having that second opportunity to reenter society as a productive member of that society. And I think that's vital.
Yeah, I mean, because there's a lot to offer with someone as yourself. I mean, being a part of going to prison, being a part of the you get a prison gang, and then going in and coming out after how many years? A long time being in there.
Mm-hmm.
People
Yeah,
like,
40.
oh, go ahead.
No, I was going to say 45 years is a long time.
Yeah,
And that's how long I was incarcerated, and decades of that in solitary confinement. So it's like anything else. There's a learning curve.
hmm,
And, in my particular case, as a result of my emotional intelligence being arrested at an early age, as a result of not only my incarceration, but the various experiences I had growing up, um, I was very immature. And, that lack of maturation is critical toward understanding my own evolution as a human being. And so, I would encourage anyone that pursues that and is pursuing that, even behind the iron gates. That's really where it begins. If you have the opportunity, take that opportunity and, pursue your own evolution. as it relates to your humanity, and understanding that more times than not, our emotional intelligence has been arrested. And so in our immaturity, we need to work on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because when you're in these situations, like, say becoming, getting out of a gang or going into prison, and certain things change and it makes you feel a certain way. Like, say, you say you're going to prison, and now all your friends and everyone that you're around with your gang, everyone's gone. So now it's like, now you're ready just to move on and get away from that life and grow as, a human being, whether depending on how long you're in prison. But it's like, you want to be better. I don't know if that probably don't come right away. Even in your case, it didn't. You had to go through certain situations, and you're like, at one point you're like, yeah, this isn't what I want to be around. And then, I think you ended up cooperating with the feds in there and telling them, hey, this is what they're planning to do, and I don't want no part of it. You had that breaking point.
It is just that. That's an excellent example of what we're talking about here, is that you're confronted with, in my case, I call it, I was confronted with two truths: the truth by which I was raised, which was good, and the truth that I was living, which was bad. And so you come to a crossroads there, and a decision has to be made. And in making that decision, it's your motive that becomes important, for doing what you intend to do. Right. So, for me, it's not about 30 pieces of silver or getting a reduction of sentence. When I began cooperating with law enforcement, I did an additional 38 years in prison. So I didn't receive anything for it. And I had numerous attempts on my life by both prisoners and staff as a result of my position with law enforcement. So, life became actually much more difficult as a result of making that decision, but I know it was the right decision. And while it may have had consequences, it's like any other adversity. You figure out how to resolve it.
Yeah, and even in your case with this, you didn't even, you cooperated and you didn't even get any additional time off or anything. Did they offer that to you?
I wouldn't allow it.
You didn't allow it?
No, that always comes out of the mouth of law enforcement, because, they want what they want for the reasons that they want it. Now, the distinction I made was that, I was willing to provide testimony, for instance, in cases where children had been assassinated along with their mothers. And, that was something that I wouldn't condone. So I took a stand. And in taking that stand, there's an ethos associated with that also. And so you find out what your beliefs are when they're put to the test. And if this is truly something that I felt that I didn't believe in, and that's the determination that I came to and that I could not condone, and then that's your only motive. It's not about incentives or, what can be done for you as a result of providing information. And for those who do that, that's their prerogative, and I'm not judging them. I'm simply stating that, my reasons weren't associated with any reward type system. Mm-hmm. I was confronted with, again, those two truths. I had a decision to make. I made that decision, and I adhered to the principle. And that's really what we're talking about here, is that all of us have our own value system. And the principles inherent to my value system dictated that I could not condone the activities that I was seeing, nor be a part of them. Now, because I'd had a rather large role in my leadership capacity within the gang in developing the infrastructure of that gang, I felt a responsibility to address that. But by the same token, law enforcement became very upset with me because there were certain things that I wouldn't discuss. I wasn't interested in, bringing down families or, individuals who were engaged in a lifestyle that was their livelihood. And oftentimes, that's not really a matter of choice. That's a matter of your environment. So, for instance, with the RICO prosecution against the Aryan Brotherhood, I declined to become involved in that. And the reason I did was simply because I knew that many of the witnesses that law enforcement were using in that case were not telling the truth. And, that's, again, when you understand that, you have to make a choice. And I chose not to be involved with that. I mean, I endured beatings at the hands of law enforcement that wanted me to testify in cases a certain way, and I would. Some of those beatings took me within a hair of my life, and
Jeez.
I was fortunate to survive them. So again, it comes down to my attitude is this, Adrian: there are no answers, only choices.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had some choices to make. I made those choices, and I stuck by those choices. I have no regrets, none, as it relates to the choices I made.
Yeah, and that is a really terrible thing to go through. Having law enforcement come after you. I mean, they're supposed to be the ones that are protecting and making sure everything's going good. And then even with becoming, a witness. I mean, in
Mm.
certain aspects of it. I mean, you didn't want to destroy the whole structure of the Aryan Brotherhood, but you just wanted to talk about, hey, this is a stand I want to make. I don't want no part of this. I don't want this going on with people's families and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, even then, law enforcement really wanted you to testify in their RICO cases and stuff. And I would imagine they can get away with it, beating you up and stuff because hell, they know the blind spots. They know where to get you
Yeah.
at. I mean,
Well, they're in control.
yes, they
You
are.
see, that's really the bottom line. And so, and it isn't to suggest, had it not been for people in law enforcement who were true to their convictions, I probably wouldn't be alive, because there were a number of instances in which, they actually saved my life, and members of my family. So, this isn't to bad rap law enforcement. It's simply to suggest that in any organization, you're always going to have individuals who deviate from the letter of the law and their responsibilities as it relates to that. So, and that's all we're talking about here. This isn't to suggest that, everybody within the Department of Corrections was bad or within law enforcement was bad. That's not the case.
No, I mean, there's just those certain ones that, may spoil the whole batch sometimes, but
Yeah,
that's with everything. You know what I mean?
it is.
And
You're right. Right. That's true.
yeah. And, well, either way, I mean, you started after you had cooperated, you were in what are the confinement, solitary confinement for quite a while. And for your mental, I mean, did you get to go outside? Did they give you any of that, or how was that mentally for any of that?
Well, when you live in solitary confinement, it's usually just that. It's there's a lack of human interaction. But I had learned all the way back to my earliest recollections on the reservation that, my family was really in nature, and my spirituality is what maintained not only my humanity but my sanity as it relates to that. So they did provide me with the opportunity. Eventually I had the opportunity to build sweat lodges, to conduct ceremony, and of course to engage in my practices, to dance, to sing, and speak my language. Because when I first went to prison, it was against the law to speak my language.
Really?
It was against the law to practice native spirituality. There were just a number of things that all changed in the late 70s. With the passage of the American Indian Religious Freedom Act. And that enabled us to start building sweat lodges. And I engaged in all that. So I shouldn't make it sound as if it was all terrible. It wasn't. I had many, many experiences, hundreds of experiences within the sweat lodge and the Native community, and the opportunity to embrace my spirituality on that level.
So they did eventually. I mean, but what do you think the reason was in the beginning, like that they didn't? Why it was illegal to practice that in prison?
Well, you had three main religions, and they were the only religions that were recognized. So Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And Islam actually was late on that particular bandwagon. So, it's again going back to that idea that, bigotry wears many feathers. These were the dominant religions within the culture within America. And you want to remember that there's a history of America attempting to suppress Native spirituality all the way back to the ghost dances, and to essentially assimilate Native culture into the melting pot of American culture. And Natives suffered immensely as a result of that, the loss of their language, the loss of their culture, the loss of their spirituality. And in the last 2-3 decades, there's been a resurgence, fortunately, in that as a result of their economic standing improving through casinos and otherwise. So, and that's a blessing. So it's come full circle. But back in the 70s, that was not the case. If you spoke your language, the idea is that staff couldn't understand what you were saying. So you may be talking about, say, an escape or some form of violence. So it was forbidden.
Yeah.
And
yeah, so I mean that had been rough for you because I mean when you went in there, I mean I think what year were you in prison? 1973 or 4?
Well, the crime was in 73, and then you go through the process of the trial and everything else. So I hit prison in 75.
So around that time is when they started changing the laws and stuff a little bit
70,
after you
70,
got there.
78 is when they changed the law. And then, it took another 4 or 5 years for it actually to become active, within the prison. So even after that, the prison administration fought it. They didn't want sweat lodges in the prison. They didn't want, the idea of rattles and hand drums and, feathers. They didn't want the rocks associated with the lodge itself to be in there. They didn't want fires to be built on prison grounds. I mean, there were just a multitude of factors that had to be worked out and were worked out, so that it provided the Native community behind the iron gates the opportunity to finally practice their way of life. And that's the thing. It's not a religion. It's a way of life. It's a lifestyle, but more importantly, a way of life.
Yeah. So I mean it was really your release that you had while being in this confinement.
Yes. I mean, not just a release, but my foundation, not only toward my survival, but the evolution of my own humanity.
Yeah. So that's good that they eventually did let you do that, and I mean that was kind of your freedom. That was the thing that they let you go outside, and they had to. I mean they because religion is in prison. I'm sure that's a big deal. I mean it's just
It
like
is.
I mean you have to abide by the religious rules and laws.
Yes. Yeah, and it's freedom is a state of mind. I mean, when a person is released from prison, you're really talking about their liberation from confinement. So it's a liberty in that. But freedom is a state of mind, and when you enter the sweat lodge, it's actually spirit lodge, but most people refer to it as sweat lodge. But when you enter that lodge, um, therein lies your freedom because it affords you the opportunity to walk with your ancestors, to be reborn in essence, in your spirit. And it's a true blessing. So there's nothing more freeing than that.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that it really would be some kind of freedom and right. I mean, it's like you said, way of life, but I mean, it's you being able to give the opportunity to escape and be free while being behind those walls. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, maybe someday we'll talk about epigenetics, but it's one of the fields that I most enjoy
Hmm.
um, in my pursuit of helping others recover in their addictions and otherwise. But, the lodge itself has great potential for helping others do just that, whether they're behind the iron gates or in free society. The experience is the same. Um, so, there's no deviation in that.
Right. So when you were also in, the whole confinement, how many years were you confined? Because when you first got there, you're with the AB, but then, after you'd cooperated, you went into the, confinement after that.
I did, yeah. I went into a unit that existed in Tehachapi at the time. There was only 6 of us in that unit. Very special unit. It was administered by the associate warden. The staff were handpicked, and you were completely isolated. So, I spent 10 years there, and then they opened up a unit in Corcoran when they built Corcoran Prison. And so they moved the unit to Corcoran, and so I spent 10 years there. And then in leaving Corcoran, at one point in time, the Department of Corrections developed what they called sensitive needs yards. And it was probably the worst mistake the department ever made.
How come?
Well, it afforded too many opportunities for developing different infrastructures, gang infrastructures. Sometimes there was more violence on the so-called sensitive needs yards than there was on a regular general population yard. And there are a number of reasons for that. You had gang dropouts, you had people who were engaged in their pursuit of addiction. And, that's one of the biggest problems within the Department of Corrections is the idea of addiction, drug use, substance use, and the violence associated with that. And so that creates a problem in and of itself. And
I was just going to say, so that was, the drugs and stuff. I mean, people are really able to get them in there. And even for the prisoners, they're still able to afford this while being locked up. I mean, how did they even do that? Like, did they go to their families and say, hey, well, I need money for this and that, but it's actually for drugs?
See, that's the problem, is that, the individuals who suffer that addiction oftentimes are enabled by their families. Their families naturally feel bad about the fact that they have a loved one who's incarcerated. And they may even know that he's self-medicating through his addiction. But in their mind, it lessens the burden upon their loved one. It's that self-medication is an escape, into another reality. And, it becomes a disease of the brain. So we used to think of it as some form of moral turpitude. But we now know that it's a disease of the brain, and it takes over the brain. It changes the whole biochemistry of the brain. And as such, the families become manipulated, friends become manipulated towards supporting this particular individual's addiction. Now, if he doesn't have that, and then he's looking to call what getting by and getting over. So he maneuvers, within the system itself to facilitate feeding his addiction. And it's that usually brings violence into the scenario. Collection for the debt and, the manipulation of others, setting people up, it has a lot associated with it that in my mind is all negative. Mm-hmm. And so it presents a really big problem. But the thing I wanted to emphasize in that it's not just the individual who's incarcerated that is being hurt here. It's the families and the loved ones and the friends of that person.
The ones feeding the addiction, fueling it. I would imagine, that's got to be rough on them. Just the whole situation. The guy in prison, people on the outside, it's not a good deal. I mean, because look how much it affects the whole prison, structure. And like you were saying, I mean, it just, it brings violence, people getting set up, and there's more and more to it. But drugs in prison, I mean, you wouldn't imagine they're not supposed to be there, but I mean, they got a whole lot of shit in there.
Yeah, you're not going to stop that. And it's oftentimes referred to in relationship to a person's crime as the ripple effect. So an individual's crime not only affects that person, but his family, the victim, the victim's family, the community, and so on. And it has a ripple effect that's just enormous. Well, the same thing applies to the environment of prison. There's that ripple effect. Mm-hmm. So that, the addiction itself facilitates that ripple effect within the community of the prison itself. And again, it carries over to the individual, the victims' families, and so on. And so it's a pattern that just unfortunately continues to repeat itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can absolutely see why. And when so to segue into another topic of you getting out, what did that look like when you're getting out? Because you said you just got out 4 years ago. Uh,
Mhm.
who approached you? I mean, did you get out a little bit early, or did you serve your full term?
No, I served 45 years. I had a 7-year life term. That means I was eligible for parole in 7 years. I was eligible for
Oh,
parole in 1981. So I could
mhm.
have been released at any time from 1981 forward.
Damn.
Because I would not admit to my commitment offense, I went before the board 17 times and was denied parole. Eventually, under the Youthful Offender Act and the fact that the commissioner on the board at the time, Randy Grounds, was a former warden and old school. And so, I could speak to him straight and did. And we came to an understanding. And so that he afforded me the youthful offender criteria and as such released me.
Damn.
And yeah, and that's why the law itself is so important. And, it hurts my heart that there's now an effort to use me as a poster boy, to say this is what happened when you release an individual like this under the Youthful Offender Act. So we need to repeal the act. There are thousands of individuals still incarcerated, lifers, who are working very, very hard um, to redeem themselves and to improve themselves. And they deserve that opportunity. And the vast majority of them fall under that Youthful Offender Act and deserve to be given that consideration. So the last thing that I would want to see here is that, that particular legislation be repealed. It would be a huge mistake. These people, as I said, are working very hard and they deserve that opportunity. You have many people who have been released under the Youthful Offender Act and the Elder Offender Act that are an absolute success, that have come out of prison, that have become law-abiding citizens. Many of them are working within the addiction field, to use their stories to help others. And that has extraordinary value.
It does. It really does, and that's why I said for someone like you, is it's really valuable to be out to share your stories and experiences. Not only because you can. It's just because coming from me, it's different, and coming from you is going to be different to resonate with a bunch of say at-risk kids or people
Mhm.
that go through addiction or that are in prison. Because it's like you are someone that went through it. You actually experienced it. You know firsthand that
Yes.
it's all shit, man. And you can speak from experience that this is not some road that another person wants to go down, and you can prevent that.
It's actually why, Adrian, I'm so passionate about working with at-risk youth. Um, it provides an opportunity to show them an alternative. It's not just a matter of telling them more stories or, don't do this because I did and it's bad. It's really a matter of helping them develop,
Hmm.
their own sense of self and to address their self-esteem and, their identity insofar as who they really are and who they want to be. And, we have huge problems in this country right now. And we have many at-risk youth who are being taken advantage of by gangs and other organizations, hate groups, if you will,
Hmm.
um, that are recruiting these youth to facilitate their agenda. And, the problem is that simply because these young people want to belong, they want to be loved,
Hmm.
they want that connection, they become a part of this. And more times than not, they become brainwashed. And, it's a terrible thing. So that's one of my main focuses right now. I'm working with different groups. I have a workshop coming up in San Diego here next month, and then another one in Merced and another one in Fresno, where I'll be dealing with just those very issues. And the key here is not to approach these at-risk youth with the idea that they've done something wrong. Rather,
No.
the key is to demonstrate to them that each and every one of them have a leadership potential. And so it's a matter of helping them understand what that potential is and realizing that potential, toward something other than illicit activities or becoming a member of a gang, or facilitating the agenda of these hate groups. And, domestic terrorism is huge in this country right now. And the problem with that is that our youth are extremely vulnerable to that. And the exposure of our communities is critical, in this context of, domestic terrorism. It's something that as a country, I honestly believe that we need to take a hard look at. And so I'm going to do whatever's within my means and ability to stand for helping our youth realize their potential.
Yeah, well, no, that's awesome because I mean that's really what they need to hear versus, hey, you're wrong, you're doing all this bad crap. But if you give them an opportunity to not do the bad crap, teach them, hey, this is what you can do. This is what you seem to be really good at. That's you might be a good leader, you might be a good mechanic, whatever it may be. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
there's opportunities versus the crap that
Yes.
they're in now.
I call it the opportunity bias.
Hmm.
And, it's not an original term on my part, but rather on my wife's part.
Hmm.
And, it's critical toward understanding that whenever you're confronted with a negative situation, that within that negative situation, there's always an opportunity. And it's finding that opportunity and
Yeah.
making it your own, towards something constructive and productive.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I could agree with you on that. I mean, I've went through certain things, and I mean, even with COVID and all kinds of
Mm.
stuff, that when that hit, other opportunities came up because there wasn't hours to work. Just for a little short example, so I started my show, my podcast. I
Mhm.
found something
Yeah,
that
that's great.
some kind of thing, and
Mhm.
it's weird, yeah, but it's true. When I was just saying that for an example, but I mean, Michael, I really, really, really like your story, man. I appreciate you coming on, and I just think you got a really good redemption story, and that's why I thought you were a perfect fitting guest. And I'm glad you're still out there in the community trying to, push for the youth, and even
Mm.
on top of that, these laws that they're trying to appeal and stuff. I mean, that's you're standing up and you're really trying to make a difference, and that's
Thank
that's
you,
that's a
Adrian.
great thing.
Yeah, the key here is you fully understand is about education. So, the attempt of your podcast and the attempt of my endeavors is to educate the public on the very issues that we face as a society and how, anyone has the opportunity, to engage on this level by way of support or volunteerism or just, speaking up, relative to the issues that we face as a society. And this is critical. For me, you're thanking me for being on your program, but it's actually an honor and a privilege to be on your program.
Well, I'm glad you I feel the same way, man. So the feeling's mutual. So I do appreciate it. You were a phenomenal guest, and like you said, we could always do more.
We
And
could.
I mean, whatever you got going on, man, I'll keep following you. I'll stay in touch. And what about? Do you want to leave the people with any message or anything that they can find you or?
Yeah, I mean, I've brought my own podcast up. It's Thoughts and Observations with Michael Thompson. I haven't been able to do a lot of work on it because of the various legal issues that I'm dealing with, but there'll be a lot more coming up. I've got a book coming out called Warhorse, and
Cool.
so that will be e-published, and they'll be able to get that on Amazon. And I have another website that I'm bringing up with my wife called Coaching for Life. So we will be offering coaching to individuals that desire it for whatever reason. And, our podcast will be linked to that. And then, of course, we have the Live, Learn, and Prosper website. And, I just recently got the internet back. They prohibited me from being on the internet for almost 2 years. And so I got it back, and I'm getting things worked out. The learning curve is huge.
I'm
And,
sure.
I have a reasonable intelligence, but let me tell you something. The technology, while fascinating, has a very steep curve for an old man like me. And,
Yeah.
but I'll get there, and I'll ask people to be patient. They can contact me through my email, and I always respond. It may take me a day or two, but I always respond. And the thing is based on what we're doing, the idea here is that with everything that I do, including this podcast, I send the smoke of my prayers, toward the well-being of our communities, the individuals. The idea here is love, and how we pursue that love in the course of our everyday activities. And it's a message that I want to advocate. And I'll just say thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you, man. I know just by you doing your book and your podcast, you're going to be able to touch a lot of people. I mean, just the way you speak, I'm looking forward to that book, man. The way you talk and carry yourself, I know that's going to be a damn good book.
Thank you, Adrian.
Michael has one hell of a mindset. He was in prison for 45 plus years. He literally did decades in prison, and he's got a good mentality for being in that environment for so many years. Michael really has changed his life around for the better. He is another definition of a good redemption story. Lots of people that are involved with the criminal life or currently in prison or going through what Michael went through. It's never too late to make a change in your life. Please share this video with anyone that you think will enjoy this video, or anyone that you think this will make an impact on their life. Please comment any key takeaways that you get from this interview. I love hearing back from everyone and responding to everyone's comments. Also, please don't forget to hit subscribe to my channel if you want to get more interviews like this. I'll put Michael's podcast in the video description below if you want to go and check out him and see what other stories he's got coming out. I'll put my clothing brand website in the video description if you want to support my clothing brand as well. And the last thing I'll bring up is the Invest in Yourself podcast playlist. You can find all my other interviews that I've done in the past on that playlist. Thank you again for watching.